Hi everyone, welcome to today's Speakers for Schools broadcast. We're delighted that you've been able to join us today. This session will last for around 45 minutes and we'll have an interview with our speaker before moving into some Q&A. So questions for our speaker can be submitted right now. The box is open, it's underneath the stream you're watching. If you scroll down a little bit on your screen, you can find that there. We do encourage you to submit questions in response to anything said today. We'd love to hear from you. Any issues at all during this session, please let us know via the same box. We'll do our best to try and support you there as well. Just a content warning for this session. We'll be exploring the science of addiction, including discussions about drugs, alcohol, and their effects on the brain. While the talk is designed to be educational and informative, some content may be sensitive for some people. If any part of the discussion is distressing, please feel free to step away and speak to a trusted adult, and some resources will be available for you as well after the session too. So today we're excited to welcome Professor Anne Lingford-Hughes, who is a Professor of Addiction Biology and was Head Division of Psychiatry at Imperial College London. She's also a consultant psychiatrist at Central North West London NHS Foundation Trust and does clinical work treating people with substance addiction. Professor Anne Lingford-Hughes was recently appointed as UK Government's new Addiction Healthcare Goals Office of Life Sciences. The aim of the Goals programme is to develop research infrastructure and make the UK a leading location for researching and deploying innovative approaches, medicines and technologies to combat substance addiction. So Anne graduated in medicine from Oxford University, completed her PhD at Cambridge and postdoc at National Institute of Mental Health USA. And Professor Lingford-Hughes teaches medical students BSc and master's programs. As part of training and supporting the next gen of clinical academics, she's been a member of several research panels as well as on boards and councils. So welcome in, Anne. Morning there. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. That yeah, quite
Good to
a
see
long
you.
introduction, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry, a lot
No,
of
thank
work.
you.
Yeah. But it's amazing to hear what you're doing and how much you've done so far. So it's a pleasure to have you here with us
Thank you
this
for giving me
morning.
the opportunity.
Of course, let's dive straight in so we can get to know more about you.
Sure.
So the young people listening can get to know you. Tell us about your career journey and your current role.
Thank you. And just again to emphasise, if there is anybody who the content we're going to talk about today, please do reach out. There's lots of help out there, and we've put some resources together. So when I was your age, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and but I knew what I kind of liked at school. So I liked the sciences, I liked biology in particular, I liked projects. I really struggled with writing exams and doing exams, and so I really knew that I kind of liked projects and examining things and being curious. And so that led me really to think at university, when I was going to university, there wasn't many options to do kind of biomedical science or something. It was really either biochemistry or medicine, human biology. So I ended up applying to go to medical school, even though I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a doctor, but I liked human biology. I liked kind of working out things. You've just heard my CV. I actually failed to get into university first time, and but I knew that's kind of what I wanted to do. And my dad was really supportive of me. And he basically said to my school, you know, she is going to try to get into, in fact, Oxford. And I did fail. And I think they felt, well, you're not, you know, we told you you weren't good enough. And I think that was the thing. I kind of always knew that things would work out. And I had my dad's support. And I finally found some teachers and some people around me that were able to support me, and I did get in second time. But it's taught me also that not to be worried about failure, but also then to understand what you may need to do to get to the next stage. So I wasn't very good at some parts of maths and stuff like that, but I had to be good enough to get to the next level. And so I would spend a bit of time. So when I got to medical school, I really liked the project side of it. I really liked doing projects. So I then decided, rather than to continue my training to become a doctor on the wards, I got an opportunity to continue doing projects. And that's when I did my PhD in Cambridge. And even then, I did that. I liked doing that. And I still didn't want to become a doctor and be on the wards in a white coat. So I then went to the United States. And my motivation was I wanted to travel. And I'm not very good at languages. And English is the international language of science. So I thought, this is great. Okay, I went to America when They do speak English most of the time. And I just thought, this is great. I wanted to do other things. I wanted to travel and get other experiences. And through my career, therefore, I have been able to travel all over the world. Japan, India, Brazil. It's been amazing. So that was also a big driver for me. And it was then that I thought, actually, I can see why I might want to become a doctor now, because I was really interested in how the brain works. And most people were saying, if you become a doctor, then you can really make a difference to patients and people. And so I came back and completed my training, but almost immediately I went back into research. So my entire career, I've always combined seeing patients with doing research and projects. And so if you said to me at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, you can do, this is what a job might look like, I didn't know at that stage. And I had nobody who could tell me that's what I could end up doing. So it's taken a few years. But that's the journey. So, it was not what I planned at all.
But it's amazing to hear it, and also just how you mentioned just then about being with patients and also researching. It's like you're always learning and always kind of improving along the way, which is great. Yeah. So how did you go from studying medicine to specializing in addiction biology?
So when you study medicine, you have to specialize in something. And when I came back into medical school to do my clinical training, on the wards and in the community GP surgery stuff, I knew I wanted to do psychiatry because of my experience in research working on the brain and being around psychiatrists that also did research. So I was very keen. That's what I did. So as soon as you're qualified as medic, that's when you start then training as a psychiatrist, and that takes up to 6 years. It took, at the moment, that's the length of time. But during that period, I started to go back to what I had done during my research and thought this would make a really good research project to do in the clinic. And so I brought the two together, and it just so happened that I've been working on how alcohol affects the brain, trying to understand how it affects some of the chemicals in your brain. And I brought that work I'd done in the US into the clinic, and I said, can I do this here? And luckily I got funding. So it was actually from my basic science, my love of how chemicals work in the brain, that I then moved into the clinic. And then I completed my training to work in addiction, especially. So it was again, it took a while, but all the bits started to come together.
Amazing. And yeah, that's what journeys are like. There's always like little bits that fit in place there. Thank you. So how long does it take to train as a psychiatrist or an addiction specialist?
So so you've got to get through medical school, and then currently you've got 2 years of foundation training, and then you get something called core training and then specialty training. Those are each 3 years. So even after you graduated, that's a minimum of 8 years. But a lot of people tend to go off and do other things. Like if you become an academic, like what that means is working at university, you need a PhD. That's going to take 3 to 4 years. So it does all add up, and you do get older and older. And my friends sort of said, I'm permanently a student. But it is the career path. And actually, I think sometimes you don't want to get you don't want to reach the end, in a sense, of all your qualifications too soon, because every experience you have, whether big or small, really adds value later, but you may not realize that. You may be thinking, I've got to get to this point because that's the fastest pathway, and actually going the slow, slightly off, going slightly different routes is often much better, actually.
Yeah, it's true, because the goal is great and we can have the goal, but enjoying the things that happen along the way is really
Yeah.
important as well. That's where your experience comes from.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, so what's an exciting project or discovery you've worked on or made in your research so far? And I know we have some slides that we're going to go on to now.
Yeah. So, it's been really interesting that I really sometimes find it hard to answer this question, because actually the thing I've enjoyed most is working with people. So research is a team business, and and actually, it really gets you through some of the challenges you have, and you can celebrate and enjoy all the good things. But for me, I don't think we understand enough about why people take a drug. Why does a young person or even an older person take up a drug? And the corollary of that is then, why does somebody keep taking it when it's clearly not doing them, their health, any good, causing problems at home, at work, at school, or wherever? And I think some of the things I think is interesting here is trying to understand why. And we've been, as with many other people around the world, we tend to try and group things to understand how that might then relate to the brain. So a lot of people might take a drug to stay awake, often exam time, you want to revise longer, they want to get high, they just like it, they want to get escapism. So that's a really positive thing. But a huge number of people take drugs because they're not feeling right. They want to feel better. They may be anxious, they maybe can't sleep, bored. And if you look at those emotions and feelings, those are very different things. So you would expect them to be a different chemical system in the brain, and there is. And then there's the social pressures. And if you think about the changes in our addiction recently, think about tobacco smoking to vaping, a lot of that's been done by social pressures. Alcohol's the same to some extent, getting completely drunk and throwing up everywhere. I have a daughter at university. It is a bit of a giggle, but it's also not actually anymore. It's not quite so acceptable. So I think the social pressures are also really important. And if I just then go to the next slide. So for me, this is a map of the brain and all the different areas. And I don't want to go into all the different names, but we can now map where the reward, the positive feelings can be. And that might be a lot of the blue. It's an area called the striatum. We really focus on, getting a reward is really quite important. Lack of control. So if you think about, if you get a drive, teenagers are all about risk taking and going out into the world and exploring. What stops you maybe, jumping off a high building or a cliff or doing something that's going to cause huge harm is this part of your brain, your frontal lobe kind of controls it, says, hang on a minute, just think about it. And as the brain develops, this gets more and more prominent into your early 20s. But we know that this partnership this relationship is really important. So you've got a lack of control, impulsivity. And that, again, has a very different kind of chemistry or chemicals in the brain. And so when I'm thinking clinically, it's like, well, how can I change the reward system, maybe? How can I change or boost the control system to give people more control? And that's what we do. So once people have become addicted, to put it very simply, the control of consumption has been lost. So they've moved over this sort of slightly invisible line, and you can ask them, who's got control, you or the drug or alcohol? And often people will hesitate. So what we're trying to do is boost that control system and alter the activity in the reward system so they're not chasing that reward. But the other critical thing, I think, in my clinical field is overcoming the negative feelings of anxiety. So many people who then present for treatment or have got into difficulties with drug and alcohol, they are really not in a good space. The idea of their drug use being rewarding or liking it, well, they can't really remember that day. It's all about keeping away withdrawals, the anxiety, the sweating, the shaking, the sort of feeling of dread and doom. And so this part of the brain, which is a very different part of the brain, it's a brain called the amygdala, is a completely different part. And again, that has a very particular chemical targets that we're now unearthing. So for me, this is where my research has been really. And there's two things. One is trying to understand that hyperactivity, greater activity in this negative part of the brain drives a lot of people continuing to use drugs and alcohol. So my lab is looking at medications particularly that might change that difficulty that people are having. We've also been looking at the reward system, which is very blunted in person who's drinking a lot of alcohol and take a lot of drugs. And if you haven't got much function in that, it's your natural reward pleasure system, you need more function. So we're trying to find safer ways of trying to get that reward system responding normally to a nice day, an enjoyable outing with your family or friends, so that you don't need drugs and alcohol so much. So this is where my group is, many around the world, we've been trying to modify these brain functions to, one, maybe understand why people might get addicted, but also then to stop people struggling to maintain their drug use under control or even stop it completely. I'll leave it at there. But
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's really nice to see that the image there of like the different parts, because yeah, it's hard to imagine that your brain can be like there's so much going on in there, like in terms of the parts. But yeah, thank you for that. What's one myth about addiction that you would like to debunk today?
I think I mean, addiction is really stigmatized, and a lot of people think, people with an addiction lack moral fiber, or they just need to pull their socks up, or just get it together. I think but the people I meet are in extremists. They just can't stop. They know it's causing them harm. They know that it's destroying a lot of their life, their family's life. And if we have, again, any children here whose parents or siblings or family, been around somebody with an addiction, it is really disruptive, and it is really sometimes hard to understand. But I think we now know enough that there is a hereditary component, there's a genetic component, there is a component about your environment and your social environment around you that may make you more vulnerable. More stress in early childhood may make you more vulnerable. This is not to remove responsibility. If you know you're more vulnerable, then you need to take steps to help with that, and that's important as well. But I think it's trying to debunk that, really, that it's not necessarily their fault, or it's, one might say, they're making a choice to take that drug in the morning, or wherever, or alcohol. But many people, that choice is not present, and part of what we do in treatment is to try and get that choice back for them, so that they can not rely on these drugs. And that's, I think, is the main thing. I mean, if we could change the stigma, it would be huge. That would be a big thing, really.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And yet we are in British Science Week, and why is it important for weeks like this to exist to inspire the next generation of scientists?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, because I actually don't come from a family of scientists, really. They're mainly, more linguists, lawyers, like classics, Latin and Greek, etc. So I wasn't necessarily, I didn't come from a family of medics. I was the first medic. And so it was school that got me into science, really. I do like biology and chemistry. Physics was not necessarily my favorite. My husband's a physicist, but I think that kind of being able to show all the interest and the wonderful things you can do, and is really, really important. And this gives us a focus. And because there are lots of organizations that help kids get some experience of science, because sometimes science at school can be a bit dry. And I think this is a lovely way of just opening it up, really. I know my university, Imperial, has programs for year 12s to come in, and many of us do that, trying to bring that engagement, because actually without scientists, a lot of the world's problems are not going to be solved. So we need scientists. We need to inspire the people sitting in school at the moment.
Definitely, and you're definitely doing that. I'm sure of that. And what advice would you give to those students who want to go into medical research and start that journey?
Well, of course, I would say go for it. But as you heard, I had no idea what I do now could do. And I think the other thing I'd say, I've been speaking to somebody recently who's been doing neuroscience, and they were trying to work out, should they do medicine? A bit like I was. Well, I'm doing my research. Do I really need a medical degree? And actually, if you've got a medical degree, it opens so many more doors for you in terms of your research, without question. But they had no idea that I was still seeing patients as well as doing my research. I also, as you heard, do a lot of teaching and all those other things as well, and advise the government. But those are all the other bits. So you can do both. I'm not going to say it's not hard to juggle. In fact, I've got to give a talk next week. Is work-life balance, academics, clinical academia is an illusion. So it does take a bit of juggling. But I love the fact that I can be in clinic, and sometimes when I'm with a patient or their family, they give me really good ideas, or they say, sorry, why is this happening to me? Or why have I got this side effect? And you're like, I don't know the answer to that, but I think I'm going to go and find that out. And that's why I like the mix, really. So you can do, I mean, I as you see, I quite like being with patients. Many of my team are not clinicians. They're really clever computer people. They do fantastic modeling of all our brain images when we image the brains of people with problematic drug use. I've got some really clever people who work in other areas such as sleep or other recordings of brain, EEG. I've got really, so what I mean is that medical research can be a whole range of different things. You can either be with patients, or you can be looking at data. You can be looking at large data sets, coming from hospital statistics down to N of 1, and the range is huge, and you can make a difference. You can see the changes in clinic because of what you're doing, and that's really nice.
Yeah, that does sound really rewarding. And kind of on the same, I guess, page there, what's the best way for students interested in science to get hands-on experience?
I mean, as I mentioned, I think through British Science Week, but also Nuffield Foundation and other organisations, like I know my university offers placements. I know many do around the country. You can look where is your closest university. Other suggestions I've seen, as if you don't, one's not in easy access for you because of travel or whatever, is some places like museums or even hospitals will always have biomedical scientists doing your test, looking at the tissues, assessing bloods. You could they will have an R&D department doing research and development. Those would be other places you could reach out to get experience. I mean, to me, it's a little bit tricky when it's in clinic because obviously patient confidentiality, you need to be, but there should be opportunities where you can get some experience of that. So those would be some of the things I would suggest.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you for walking through those questions and having these visuals as well for us. We have some questions in from our audience that we can go to now. So this one is from Nuki Trade Terrace. Sorry if I said the school name wrong, everyone. And they're asking, what is the most common age for addictions to begin or develop?
But early. In fact, most kids, I think, I'm just trying to think, I think the youngest person I had was a 6-year-old who started drinking alcohol, but he started drinking with his dad, who had problematic use of alcohol. So most people will try, most kids will, children, adolescents will try drugs, and I'm including alcohol in that. It could include caffeine, nicotine less so, from tobacco, maybe now vaping, cannabis. But as I said, teenagers is a time for kind of experimentation and taking a few risks and finding out who you are and whether you like things or not. So it is almost the norm that people will try, particularly if you include alcohol and nicotine and caffeine in drug. What tends to happen is that people either like it, or these children like it or don't like it. And then often by their late teens, early 20s, when they may be moving into employment or going to universities or something like that, then their drug use diminishes hugely. So we see a lot of people experimenting, but then stopping it and not using it very much because they may have responsibilities. And then unfortunately, that for a minority of people, that doesn't happen, and then the problematic use continues. I would say there's another point when it may change, is when you become an adult and you may have a big life event, or something like retirement, or something happens to you, and then drug use, particularly alcohol, becomes, I mean, alcohol's pretty much the most commonest drug abused. How many people say I've had a stressful day, or I've had a drink, whatever. So we know that alcohol can help people. We saw it during the pandemic with COVID. Those people who already used alcohol to help them feel better, their drinking went up. So any stress. So that's the other thing, but it usually less so for other drugs, which is why we focus so strongly on trying to educate people about the pros and cons, because during your adolescence, your brain is not fixed, it's still developing. And obviously the impact of drugs on a 15-year-old's brain would be very different to the impact on a 30-year-old brain. And you may be setting yourself up to be more vulnerable for the rest of your life. And that's why we try to encourage people, we do encourage people to push it back as long as you can.
Yeah, that is really good. Thank you for asking that. A question has actually come through, kind of what you just touched on there. What is the most common addiction? I know you mentioned alcohol is up
Yeah, I mean,
there. Yeah.
alcohol and tobacco are really up there with if talking globally. You know, in terms of the numbers of people, then alcohol, certainly in the UK, as you know, less about tobacco now. Although obviously a lot of concerns about vaping, nicotine. So those are the two, the biggest, and obviously the change in tobacco smoking has been huge over the years. And you know, we know that the links with cancer and cardiovascular disease, heart disease, etc. You know, that's all very much in the public domain now, and that's impacted on people. Well, as we talked about, all those social things tends to impact your health later on in life. Alcohol, on the other hand, sadly kills people, and particularly young people. So it's one of the leading causes of death through accidents of young people. And that's tragedy. I think most people, I remember going to school once where one of the pupils had just been killed in a drink drive accident. So I think we all know people who maybe got into grief, alcohol. So alcohol's very, yeah, but alcohol's also related to quite a number of cancers. I think a lot of women are aware of the link with breast cancer, but the cancers of the gut in particularly. So I think those are the two biggies in terms of the impact on health and wider society.
Yeah.
Think about the impact of alcohol and on a Saturday night, or not even a Saturday night, on a town centre.
Mm,
Um, it's big.
yeah, it is big. And I guess adding on to that, someone's asking what are the most unusual addictions that people can have.
That's interesting. So if we think of addiction as consuming something you've lost control of, and obviously substances are the most common thing to think about. Um, as part of a review, in fact, I've been asked to look for the next 30 years, what will we have? We've probably got all the chemicals out there. We're not going to have a brand new chemical come our way. Um, we're having variants of it. So if you think about the poppy and opium, you know, heroin, but we've got the clever chemists making very, very super potent ones. This is the fentanyl that you hear about and the opioid deaths. You know, they're very potent, and that's what's so dangerous about them. Very small amounts that can kill you. So I don't think we'll have any brand new sort of chemical, but you know, the range of substances come and go a little bit in fashion as well. I was listening to somebody talk about, you know, if there's, you know, out in popular culture about a certain kind of drug. One of them is Xanax, alprazolam, comes and goes. So some drugs come and go. But if we talk about addiction other than substances, we're now moving into behavioral things. So we've got things like gaming, gambling, internet use, food addiction or sugar addiction, phone addiction, mobile phone. So saying is that you know, there are lots of activities that can move into that field. So it's interesting over the years, particularly I think the social media and the phone. We're right at the beginning of trying to understand what that really is doing to one's brain, at least anyway.
Yeah, that's really, really good. I think because it's easy to think of substance and addiction, but also it can be in your phone. You could be stuck on your phone, and for young people, that is something quite common. So yeah, a question here. They are asking, and it's St. David's Catholic School are asking, how can you stop addiction? What are the ways to do that?
So by that question, I'm going to say stop, i.e. somebody has now crossed that line. They've lost control of their drug alcohol use and they're seeking help. And I think we have a variety of things we do. One is we sit down and talk to them. You know, can say that's an assessment, but actually just talking to somebody, finding out what are their feelings, what do they think is the matter, trying to understand it from their perspective. There are several things. Depending on the drug, we can either give them a medication to so they don't have to buy their drug on illicitly, such as heroin. We may give them a medication as substitute, so that it takes them out of they may be dealing with dealers, etc., and they've got an opportunity then to not interact with people using drugs. We may then help them stop taking that drug, and many drugs you can do that safely. Just cutting down, or at least or stopping yourself. But there are two drugs, alcohol being the main one, where just stopping suddenly, if you're drinking equivalent of, I don't know, several bottles of wine a day, or a bottle of spirits a day, could be dangerous. So some people can have a fit or a seizure, or they have something called delirium tremens, is where they get very paranoid, very frightened, very anxious, and their heart's racing. And that can be, one, very frightening for them, but also quite dangerous to their health. So we therefore give medication to help them stop. But a lot of other drugs, such as cocaine or amphetamines, ecstasy, we don't necessarily need to give medication. So once somebody's stopped, or as they're stopping, we're saying to them, what are you going to do at 6 o'clock this evening instead of drinking? How are you, what else can you do? What else gives you pleasure? We've got their risk management strategy. What are you going to do if you walk down the street and see a friend who you always smoke cannabis with? We talk through scenarios with them so they are very prepared. We go through why they might want to take the drug. Is it because they always get very anxious in a situation and they know that alcohol is going to make them feel better? Well, what other things can we teach them and they can practice to help reduce their anxiety? So in many ways, these are very broad life skills. Something called cognitive behavioral therapy, trying to understand what is your automatic negative thought that you may not be even aware of. How can we change that, get you to acknowledge it? So that feeling of butterflies in the stomach, how do you deal with that without taking a drug or drinking some alcohol? So what we're doing is we're safely helping them stop, and whilst we're doing that, we're teaching them, or working with them. Teaching them sounds a bit kind of, it's one way. It's not, because we need them to explore what works for them and not, because there's always more you can try. And then it's about maintaining that. So a lot of people join groups such as AA or NA or the SMART, they get a community which isn't centered around drug and alcohol. But the key thing to remember is it's very unusual. People I see in treatment, they've coming into treatment, very unusual for somebody to be able to stop straight away or the first time. Addiction is a relapsing, remitting. What I mean by that is people are drinking or taking drugs, and then they have a period when they're not, and then something may trigger it, and then they're back using again. And this is the norm. And so I've seen a lot of people they've relapsed, that's it. That's not the case. Most people will take a few goes. Many people manage it, but we don't see them in treatment, obviously. And I would say the other thing I learned very early on is you always are optimistic, and you always plant the seed, and you don't know if something you've said made a difference 1 or 2 years down the line. I've worked with people in recovery who said to me, a doctor said to me 2 years ago, da 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 da, and that stuck with me, but I couldn't deal with it until now, or a psychologist or a nurse. So you never know when your information or your interaction will make the change. If the kids here listening, think about a major change you want to make in your life. Think about how long you had to think about it, what you had to do to plan it, and then when it happened, it doesn't happen overnight. And that's the key thing, really, is to keep going.
Yeah, no, that's really, really great. Thank you for breaking that down. And I think you touched on it a little bit in what you were just saying. Langdon Academy are asking, why can some people quit and others can't?
Very good question. And the honest answer, we don't know, because it's not one disorder or one process for different people for different things. Often it's circumstance. Other things are happening in their life that they realize that actually, no, this has got to change. I can't continue like this anymore. What I showed in that brain mechanism, there are clearly people where that negative stress drive is really prominent. And I would say up to now, as a community, we focus very much on the reward and the control part. And in our brain imaging studies, where we're imaging these processes in the brain, we can see that some people have got very, just frozen a bit. We've got some people who have the stress system really quite dysregulated. And when I think about it, what we're doing in terms of treating them often with medication or psychotherapy, we may be targeting more the control and the reward, and we should be targeting maybe the stress system. We do try to be person-centered or patient-centered. We work with what they bring, what they say is the primary thing. But often it's, an alignment of various things. That's what I mean about every relapse cycle. People learn something that they bring into, if they relapse again, that gets them clean or sober just a little bit longer the next time. So I would say there's no magic bullet from that,
Yeah, everyone is different, and it can
Yeah.
be different, for different people. Herne Bay High School are asking, is the role of dopamine in addiction still the primary explanation used to explain addictive behaviors?
Yes and no. I would say so. I've avoided. So dopamine is the key chemical neurotransmitter in the brain to do with the reward system. So the that central kind of positive thing is dopamine is heavily involved. And a lot of research and a lot of effort has been trying to understand this pathway. As a clinician, in my clinic, I have various medications I can prescribe, but the ones I use routinely, none of them directly target the dopamine system to treat addiction. We do have them, but what it means is we've had all these years of research. We understand an awful lot about it, but none of them target it directly. So it is important, but it hasn't yielded that busting drug to help us, medication. The other thing to say about it is that certainly stimulants like cocaine, amphetamine directly target the dopamine system. So you'd expect them to change dopamine levels, and they do. But interestingly, alcoholism doesn't directly target the dopamine system, but also that can change dopamine levels. If you start looking at other drugs of abuse, such as opiates or cannabis, MDMA, ketamine even, nicotine to some extent, it's been much harder to show dopamine changes in human beings in imaging. So we can image the dopamine system brain, been really hard. So that, and animal models would also tell us dopamine is there, but it's not the key answer or the key driver for some drugs. It plays a role. And another system you may have heard about is the endorphin system, the endorphin rush, those that run marathons and do hard exercise. Now, the endorphins are the opioid system, and the opioids modulate and moderate the dopamine system. And a lot of the medications we use actually target the opiate system, and those can be really successful in helping people overcome their addiction. So dopamine is important, but the other systems are really critical. And if we think about the anxiety, stress, dopamine plays less of a role in that.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. You touched on it a little bit in what you just said. There's a second part to that question from the same school. They're asking, what are the key weaknesses in using that explanation?
So I think when you're studying an addiction for various reasons, if you think about animal models, a lot of them have studied cocaine, amphetamine, and partly that's because the experiments are, they're not saying they're easy, but they can be robust, reliable, reputable. A lot of labs use them. It's actually quite hard to get animals to drink alcohol. They don't necessarily like it. And opioids, interestingly, have some, depending on the species, may have a different metabolism. So if you're trying to link what's happening in humans to animals, a lot of the models use cocaine, but problem, as I said, cocaine directly targets the dopamine system. So, and often you do an animal model of cocaine versus alcohol versus heroin, and they look very different. So, and the same in human beings. So I think dopamine is important, but you have to then qualify which substance are you talking about. Are you also talking about somebody who's using it heavily, or have they lost control? And the chemistry can be different there. But yeah, that's some of the weaknesses, is it doesn't apply in every model in every species, and that's the key thing, really.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And a couple of questions before we finish.
Mhm.
So this one here, does addiction tend to come from an underlying issue that hasn't been acknowledged, maybe depression or childhood trauma?
Certainly can do. And I think when I put up the slide, why do people use drugs? So when I think it's really important. And one of the first questions I ask somebody who's come to see me is, why? You know, how did this start? Why? And for a lot of really, you know, that 6-year-old, it was because his dad was drinking a can of beer and his dad gave him a can of beer. You know, for a lot of people in their teens, they realize it makes them feel better or different. I mean, alcohol, I think, you know, that phrase Dutch courage, having a drink before you go out to give you courage. um you know, and I think so these are very common things we talk about in society. So I think understanding why people use, and as I mentioned about life events, bereavement or retirement or loss, you know, older people, that's where they can maybe turn to alcohol. So there is always something underlying it. You then have to work out, is there a family history? Because if there's a very strong family history, that's going to make you more vulnerable. If there's childhood trauma, we know now what happening in your first few years of life can really impact on you as a teenager and beyond. So unpicking all of that, I have to say one of the things about being a psychiatrist is you can be really, really nosy and curious. We can't send people off for fancy scans or blood tests necessarily. We sit with people and we learn about their life, and that's a huge privilege. They share a lot with, you know, do I know the name of their dog or their, you know, sibling or their family or where they were brought up? And we have to unpick all of this, and going through that with them, they may have that light bulb moment. Actually, this experience, you know, 1 year ago, 1 week ago, or even 10 years ago, that was where this started. And I think that's, it is definitely there, and that's why often we target um, trying to understand that hugely, because unless we unpick that, we're not going to be able to help them stay sober. Very last thing I'd say is that we've got to stop people using the drug and alcohol. It's no good treating their depression, because unfortunately the treatments of their depression won't work optimally with the drug and alcohol. So we do need to understand both.
No, and I like that you said you can be nosy and curious, because yeah, learning about people's lives is a privilege, and it's
Yeah,
also really helpful for them to kind of unpack that with you rather
yeah.
than kind of like one way. Um, we have a question here from Bacher College in Brighton. How are endorphins released during exercise and why?
That's a good question, and one I don't know the answer to. One assumes by a lot. Well, there's a couple of things I think. Is one is the we know where it's made in the brain and where it gets released. The other thing is that endorphins also obviously involved in pleasure, but they're also involved in pain relief. So I do wonder whether there's something about that is protecting and giving a bit of you know, pain relief necessarily. Um, but it is another way of a sort of a natural high. But good question. You see, this is one of the questions I'm now going to go away and googling for this afternoon, and I can't get back to you. But yeah, no, I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm very happy to say I don't know the answer.
That's all good. Another question here: what is the ingredient in alcohol that makes it addictive?
So I wouldn't say there's one. Well, alcohol is, it's the alcohol chemical. It's you know, alcohols is what makes it addictive, and what makes it addictive is the effects it has on the brain in terms of changing the balance of chemicals, and particularly with alcohol, one of the drivers is that it does dysregulate the balance, which makes people more anxious, get more sweaty in the withdrawal, and also they feel better taking it. So it's the alcohol itself attaches and modifies particular receptors, the GABA system, which is the inhibitory, the glutamate, which is the excitatory, and it changes the balance between those. It boosts the inhibitory, it blocks the excitatory, so it calms everything down. But it quite particularly affects those kinds of receptors, and that's how it does it. But it's alcohol itself that's the chemical that's doing it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering these questions and being here with us. We're running out of time, and that's all we've got time for. But before you leave, as we mentioned, it's British Science Week. Do you have any like last bits of advice for anyone listening who wants to go in to a science route or medical route? Yeah, what could you leave us with today?
I would definitely do it. I mean, I've had an amazing career. When I was at your age, I had no idea what I was going to do. It's allowed me to travel. I've met some amazing people. I've had pleasure of working and privilege with some incredible teams, and all the patients and individuals with problematic drug use. It's all been amazing. No 2 days are the same. And so if you like variety and like being curious, well, one, of course, I'm going to say psychiatry as well. But definitely think about staying in this field, because it's just incredible. You never know where it's going to take you.
Absolutely, and you're here with us today, so that's something
Yeah,
new as well. But thank you so much for your time. It's been really great, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the young people listening have learned too. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
yeah, I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That's all we have time for, everyone. Thank you for being with us during this British Science Week talk. All those questions coming in as well. That was amazing. A feedback poll has gone live right now, so let us know how you found today. We'll also be sending out some links via email on feedback, but also for some support if you need some support after today's talk as well. Let us know how you found today, and hopefully see you soon for another talk in the future. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.